This is Professor Norman Markowitz presenting to all students an introduction to my course on the history of socialism and communism, a course that I developed long ago, in fact, at a time when the Soviet Union still existed, at Rutgers, and have taught for many, many years. This time, the course will be taught fully online. In the first part of our course, we'll look at the general theory of history and political economy developed by Karl Marx and his close friend and associate Friedrich Engels from the 1840s to the 1880s, called dialectical and historical materialism, called by its supporters a science of society, which has served as the foundation for socialist and communist movements, socialist and communist parties, socialist and communist revolutions and governments for over 170 years. Then, for the bulk of the course, we'll look at these movements, these parties, the revolutions that took place in their name, and the governments and societies that were created. From Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels' publication of the Communist Manifesto and the ensuing revolutions, not socialist revolutions, but revolutions of 1848, through the Soviet and Chinese socialist revolutions of the 20th century, and also to the establishment of socialist-influenced welfare states in post-World War II Europe and Canada primarily, and the role of socialist ideas, parties, and movements and policies in the independence movements that triumphed in India and Africa following World War II, and conclude with the effects of what today is called neoliberalism and globalization on both Marxist theory and the socialist and communist movements and parties and societies and governments in the world following the dismemberment of the Soviet Union in 1991, and a few years before that, the destruction of its Warsaw Treaty alliance in Eastern Europe. Let's look briefly at what both defenders of capitalism and defenders of socialism call democracy. Democracy existed historically in its early form in ancient Greece, in societies that both Marxists and non-Marxists, partisans and opponents of socialism, see as societies in which slavery was an essential institution. It existed both as direct democracy and subsequently as representative democracy, with legislative bodies that were either elected, usually by very small numbers of people, or appointed. From the ancient Roman Empire to the 19th century, democracy was associated negatively with mob rule, even by the leaders of the American Revolution. And we'll look at the American Revolution, the British Revolution of the 17th century, which preceded it, and the French Revolution, which followed it. Revolutions to create states and societies that would advance capitalist systems as against the feudal systems and societies that they rebelled against. In America, democracy came to be associated from the 1830s on with universal white male suffrage, with competitive elections, and with political parties fighting over political patronage and power. And the United States was the first large republic, the first large nation, period, to call itself a democracy. Here in the United States, the first politician widely connected with the use of the term democracy was Andrew Jackson, a slaveholder and a champion of westward expansion through the conquest and seizure of territories controlled by indigenous people called Indians, and the Republic of Mexico. In Europe, democracy came to be associated with the socialist movement from the time of the Communist Manifesto on. It was the socialist movement in many countries which led the campaign to gain the right to vote for the working classes, the lower classes. And this was subsequently picked up and used by capitalist parties. One final point, which goes against what most Americans have been taught through their lives. Not only you, but me, and generations which preceded me. Socialism is a world movement. It developed out of the so-called Western world. As late as 1946, at the end of the Second World War, communist parties of two of the major, quote, Western industrialized nations, France and Italy, were the strongest parties in their countries, although not majorities, while in the East, parties in Poland, Hungary, and Romania were not, socialism was not a significant force. The West is not capitalism. The East is not socialism. America is not capitalism. The Soviet Union in the past, or China today, the great power of socialism in the world, is not socialism. It is not a question of either or. It is not a question of rival systems fighting with each other.